Montana Territory, 1883. The last golden rays of summer sun stretched across the arid plains as Yates Flynn guided his Mustang through the tall grass. The 25-year-old cowboy's lean frame cast a long shadow, his Stetson pulled low over azure eyes that had seen too much death for someone so young. 3 years working the cattle drives had hardened him like leather in the sun, but nothing had prepared him for the loneliness that followed him like a shadow. The only thing a man can count on out here is himself and a good horse, Yates muttered to Diablo, his prized black stallion. The magnificent creature had been with him since he'd left home at 19, the only living being that hadn't abandoned him to the cruel whims of the frontier. Ain't that right, boy? The horse nickered softly as they crested the hill overlooking Whitetail Creek, a small settlement nestled between rolling hills and the distant mountains. Smoke curled from chimneys, promising warmth and community, things Yates had convinced himself he didn't need. Trust got men killed out here. Attachment was a luxury reserved for those who could afford the inevitable heartbreak. 3 seasons ago, he'd watched his trail boss die in his arms after trusting a stranger with their camp location. 2 years before that, his own brother had been gunned down by a man he'd considered a friend. The lesson was clear. The frontier was no place for trust, for connection. A man survived by keeping to himself. Yet as the setting sun painted the horizon in shades of amber and gold, an unwelcome ache bloomed in his chest. Cowboys didn't need roots. That's what he told himself with each new cattle drive, each new town. But lately, watching married men return to their homesteads, to waiting arms and children's laughter, stirred something he fought to ignore. What he needed was work. Another season, another paycheck, enough saved to buy that patch of land in Colorado. Then maybe. No, land was all he needed. A place to raise horses. Alone. Nudging Diablo forward, Yates descended toward Whitetail Creek. The Broken Spur Ranch was hiring, and winter was coming. Beth Summers stood at her kitchen window, watching the sunset with eyes the color of summer wheat. At 23, her face retained its youthful beauty despite the hardship that had prematurely lined the corners of her eyes. Her chestnut hair was loosely pinned up, tendrils escaping to frame her face, and her simple blue calico dress had seen better days, but was immaculately clean. The small ranch house felt emptier than usual this evening. 16 months a widow, and still she sometimes turned to share a thought with James, only to find empty air where he should have been. The influenza had swept through Whitetail Creek with merciless efficiency, leaving her with 20 acres, a half-dozen horses, and memory sharp enough to cut. "We'll manage," she whispered to herself, a daily affirmation that had become ritual. The horse-breeding business James had started was her lifeline now. She had learned quickly, her natural affinity with the animals proving valuable. Still, the neighboring ranchers watched with skeptical eyes, waiting for the widow to fail, to sell her land for a pittance. Beth moved to the barn, where a pregnant mare needed checking. The animals were her family now, her purpose. She had declined 3 marriage proposals already, practical offers from men who saw good land, and a young woman who could still bear children. None had seen her. "Patience, girl," she soothed the mare, running gentle hands across her swollen belly. "Your little one's coming soon." As darkness settled, Beth heard hoofbeats approaching. Visitors were rare this late, and instinctively she reached for the rifle James had taught her to use. Stepping cautiously outside, she saw a man on a magnificent black stallion, silhouetted against the twilight sky. "Hello, the house," the rider called, keeping a respectful distance. "That's close enough," Beth replied, rifle not quite aimed but ready. "State your business." The rider stopped, removing his hat. Even in the fading light, she could see he was younger than she'd expected, handsome in a way that spoke of hard living rather than soft privilege. "Name's Yates Flynn. Heading to Broken Spur for work. Was told there might be a place to water my horse along this trail." His voice carried no threat, just weariness. Beth hesitated, studying him. Something about the tired slump of his shoulders and the gentle way he handled his stallion softened her caution. "There's a pump by the barn," she finally offered. "You can water your horse there." As he dismounted, the stallion suddenly reared, eyes wild with pain. Yates barely managed to dodge the flailing hooves before the horse bolted, limping dramatically toward the open pasture. "Diablo!" Yates shouted, his composure shattered. "Whoa, boy!" Beth saw it immediately, the way the stallion favored his right foreleg. He's injured, she said, already moving. Don't chase him. You'll only spook him more. She set down her rifle and reached into her apron pocket, producing an apple she'd intended for her evening snack. With slow, deliberate movements, she approached the frightened animal, speaking in low, soothing tones. The stallion snorted, ears flicking nervously. Easy, beautiful, she murmured. Let me see what's troubling you. To Yates's astonishment, the horse, his wild-spirited, one-man Diablo who barely tolerated strangers, gradually calmed under her gentle approach. When she was close enough, Beth offered the apple on a flat palm. After a suspicious sniff, Diablo accepted the peace offering. While the stallion munched, Beth carefully examined the leg, finding a deep puncture in the frog of his hoof. He's picked up something. Looks like a nail or shard of metal. I need to get it out before infection sets in. The worry etched on Yates's face was unmistakable. Can you help him? Beth nodded, already leading the horse toward her barn. I can, but he'll need to rest here a few days. That wound will need cleaning and poulticing. Yates followed, his planned journey forgotten. He's all I have, ma'am. Something in his voice, the raw vulnerability, resonated with Beth. She understood what it meant to have your world narrowed to a single beating heart. I'm Beth Summers, she said over her shoulder. And I promise, your horse is in good hands. The lantern cast dancing shadows across the barn walls as Beth worked methodically on Diablo's hoof. Yates hovered nearby, his usual stoic demeanor cracked by concern. How'd you learn to do this? He asked, watching her skilled hands apply a poultice after extracting a rusted nail from the hoof. My husband bred horses, she replied, securing a bandage around the hoof. I learned by necessity. She paused, then added quietly, James passed last year. Influenza. Yates absorbed this information, noticing the wedding band she still wore. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Summers. Beth, she corrected. And thank you. The ranch is mine now. Not that everyone respects that fact. A hint of steel entered her voice. 5 horses due to foal this season. I'm determined to make the business work. Diablo nudged Yates's shoulder, seeking reassurance. The cowboy stroked his neck, murmuring comforts. You two have traveled far together, Beth observed. 6 years. Got him as a half-wild colt no one could break. A rare smile softened his features. Still ornery as hell, but he's never let me down. Unlike people, Beth asked perceptively. Yates's expression closed again. Horse doesn't lie, doesn't betray. Neither do some people, she countered softly. Their eyes met across the lantern light, a moment of recognition between two souls who understood loss. Then Yates looked away. It's late, Beth said, breaking the silence. There's a spare room in the house. You're welcome to it, while Diablo heals. Yates shook his head. I'll bed down here with my horse, if you don't mind. Need to keep an eye on him. Beth nodded, understanding. Suit yourself. There's stew on the stove if you're hungry. Left alone, Yates settled into the clean straw beside his horse, puzzled by the unexpected twist to his journey. Mrs. Summers, Beth, was unlike any widow he'd encountered. Most would have shooed away a strange rider, not invited him in, and tended his horse with such competence. Don't get comfortable, he told himself as much as Diablo. We're moving on soon as you're healed. But as he drifted to sleep, the image of wheat-colored eyes and gentle hands lingered. 3 days passed in an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Beth found Yates already awake, having tended to the morning chores, water drawn from the well, firewood stacked, horses fed. They worked side by side with minimal conversation, checking Diablo's healing progress and caring for Beth's horses. On the 4th morning, a spring thunderstorm rolled in, trapping them indoors. Beth moved around her kitchen, the scent of baking bread filling the small house, while Yates sat awkwardly at her table, mending his saddle. Where were you headed before Diablo's accident? Beth asked, placing a cup of coffee before him. Broken Spur, he replied. Hiring for the spring drive. Marshall Tate's outfit. She nodded. Good man. Fair wages. You know ranching well for a... He stopped himself. For a woman? Beth finished, a challenging gleam in her eye. I was helping my father break horses before I could read. James and I built this place together. Her voice softened. Now it's just me, but the work doesn't change. Yates studied her with new respect. Most widows would sell and move to town. Most widows didn't marry for love, she replied simply, turning back to her bread. The statement hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Yates found himself wanting to know more. Had she loved her husband deeply? Did she still mourn him? Why did the thought make his chest tighten uncomfortably? "Your mare's getting close," he said instead, changing the subject. "The paint with the white forelock." Beth nodded. "Magnolia. First of the season to foal, if my calculations are right." Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle. Diablo's nervous whinny echoed from the barn. "He hates storms," Yates said, rising. "Always has." "The barn's solid," Beth assured him. "But if you're worried." The sound of splitting wood and terrified horses interrupted her. Through the window, they saw the enormous oak beside the barn had been struck by lightning, a massive branch crashing through the roof. They ran through the downpour, reaching the barn to find chaos. 3 horses had broken from their stalls, including the pregnant Magnolia, who reared in panic. Diablo remained trapped, eyes rolling white with fear as rain poured through the damaged roof onto him. "The Mara's first," Beth shouted over the storm, already moving toward the frightened animals. Without hesitation, Yates plunged toward Diablo, who thrashed against his restraints. As he worked to free his horse, he kept one eye on Beth, who with astonishing skill was herding the loose horses into the corral. He managed to calm Diablo enough to lead him outside, but as they emerged, a second crash sounded. Beth's scream cut through the howling wind as another section of the roof collapsed. "Beth!" Yates shouted, leaving Diablo to dash back inside. He found her pinned beneath fallen timbers, conscious but unable to move. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, mixing with rain and tears. "Magnolia," she gasped. "She's still inside. She's going to foal any day." "You first," Yates insisted, already working to lift the beam trapping her legs. With straining muscles, he managed to create enough space for her to slide free. "Can you walk?" he asked, supporting her as she stood shakily. Beth tested her weight on both legs, wincing. "I'm all right. We need to find Magnolia." Together they searched the damaged barn, finally locating the mare huddled in the far corner, trembling but miraculously unharmed. With gentle coaxing, they led her out to join the others in the sturdy corral shelter. Drenched and exhausted, they stumbled back to the house. Yates insisted on examining Beth's injuries, his calloused hands unexpectedly gentle as he cleaned the cut on her forehead. "Could have been killed," he muttered, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "So could you," she countered, catching his wrist. "Thank you for coming back for me." Their eyes locked, and something shifted between them, something that terrified Yates more than any stampede or gunfight. Abruptly, he stood. "You should rest," he said stiffly. "I'll check on the horses again." Outside in the rain, Yates pressed his forehead against the corral fence, breathing hard. The sight of Beth trapped, possibly dying, had awakened something he'd buried long ago, the capacity to care, to fear for someone other than himself. "Dangerous," he whispered to the storm. "Remember the rule. Don't get attached." But as he looked back at the small house, windows glowing with warm light, he knew it might already be too late. "You're favoring that leg still," Yates observed the next morning as Beth limped around the kitchen. "Should see Doc Miller in town." 2 weeks had passed since the storm. The barn roof was partially repaired, thanks to their combined efforts, and Diablo's hoof had healed remarkably well. There was no reason for Yates to remain, yet each morning found excuses to delay his departure. "I'm fine," Beth insisted. "Besides, Magnolia could foal any moment." "I can't leave." Yates frowned. "I could fetch the doctor here." "For a bruised leg? Don't be ridiculous." She smiled to soften her words. "I've endured worse." The easy domesticity that had developed between them was both comforting and alarming. Each evening they sat by the fire, Beth mending or reading aloud while Yates whittled or cleaned his guns. They shared stories cautiously, Beth speaking of her childhood in Missouri, her marriage to James, Yates offering carefully edited tales of cattle drives and frontier towns. What he didn't share were the darker chapters: his brother's murder, the betrayals that had taught him to trust no one, the nightmares that still woke him sweating and reaching for his pistol. He didn't mention the letter he'd carried for 3 years, undelivered to his brother's widow and child in Denver. "Why Whitetail Creek?" he asked instead, watching her skilled hands work yarn into a pattern. "Seems isolated for a couple starting out." Beth's fingers stilled briefly. "James had consumption. The doctor recommended mountain air." Her smile turned sad. It helped for a while. We thought. We hoped we'd have more time. Yates nodded, understanding loss. No children. No, she said softly. It wasn't meant to be. Something about her quiet acceptance moved him. You'd have been a good mother. Beth looked up, surprise and warmth in her eyes. Thank you. After a moment, she asked, what about you? No wife waiting somewhere. Yates shook his head. Never stayed in one place long enough. By choice. The question pierced deeper than he expected. Safer that way. Safer, Beth repeated thoughtfully. But lonelier, I imagine. Before he could respond, a frantic pounding at the door startled them both. Yates instinctively reached for his gun as Beth went to answer. A young ranch hand stood panting on the porch. Mrs. Summers, Mr. Holden sent me. Rustlers hit the North Range last night. Took 20 head. Marshals gathering men to track them. Beth turned to Yates, an unspoken question in her eyes. He nodded, already reaching for his coat. Tell Holden I'll be there, he said. Just need to saddle up. After the boy left, Beth caught Yates's arm. Be careful. These rustlers have hit 3 ranches now. They're dangerous. Her concern warmed something long cold within him. I've handled worse. Still, she hesitated, then impulsively rose on tiptoe to press a kiss to his cheek. For luck, the touch of her lips burned like a brand. Yates stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the desire to turn his head, capture her mouth properly. Instead, he nodded stiffly and strode out to saddle Diablo, his heart pounding a dangerous rhythm. The posse tracked the rustlers for 2 days through difficult terrain. When they finally cornered the thieves in a box canyon, a fierce gunfight erupted. Yates found himself fighting alongside men he barely knew, defending a community that wasn't his own. A bullet grazed his temple, another tore through his sleeve. When the smoke cleared, 2 rustlers lay dead, 3 were captured, and the stolen cattle were recovered. Yates earned grudging respect from the local ranchers, particularly when Marshal Tate announced he'd recognized one of the dead men as a notorious outlaw with a price on his head. Riding back to Whitetail Creek, blood dried on his face and exhaustion in every muscle, Yates was surprised to find himself eager to return to Beth's small ranch. To her, the realization was uncomfortable, a challenge to everything he believed about survival on the frontier. He arrived after midnight, expecting a dark house. Instead, a lamp burned in the window, and Beth herself sat on the porch swing, a rifle across her lap. She stood when she saw him, relief washing over her face. You're hurt, she said, reaching for him as he dismounted. It's nothing, he replied, though he allowed her to guide him inside, to clean the wound on his temple with gentle hands. I was worried, she admitted quietly. The simple statement undid him. How long had it been since anyone worried about his return? Since anyone waited up to see him safe home? Home. The words surfaced unbidden. Beth. He began, not sure what he meant to say. A frantic whinny from the barn interrupted. Beth's eyes widened. Magnolia, it must be time. They rushed to the barn to find the paint mare in labor, already struggling. What followed was a night of shared effort as Beth's expertise and Yates's strength combined to help the distressed mare deliver her foal. When dawn broke, a spindly-legged colt stood wobbling beside its exhausted mother. Look at that, Beth whispered, leaning against Yates's shoulder. Perfect, isn't he? Yates found himself wrapping an arm around her waist, drawing her closer as they watched the new life find its feet. The intimacy of the moment, this shared triumph over death, overwhelmed him. Thank you for staying, Beth said softly. I couldn't have managed alone. The words pierced the armor around his heart. In that moment, with the new day breaking over them, Yates admitted to himself what he'd been fighting for weeks. He was falling in love with Beth Summers, and it terrified him. The following evening, Yates sat alone by the creek that gave the town its name, turning his brother's undelivered letter over and over in his hands. The paper was worn from years of carrying, the address in Denver faded but still legible. His brother's final words before the gunfight that took his life echoed in his memory. Promise me you'll take care of them, Yates. Emma and the baby, they'll have nothing if I'm gone. He had promised, then watched his brother die, and in his grief and rage, he'd ridden away from that promise, telling himself he'd deliver the letter containing his brother's last words and the deed to his property once he'd found and killed the man responsible. But vengeance had proven elusive, and years had passed with the letter burning a hole in his saddlebag. 3 years of running, of keeping his distance from anything that might crack his carefully constructed walls. Until Beth thought I might find you here. Her voice startled him. He quickly tucked the letter away as she settled beside him on the grassy bank. Beautiful spot, she said, watching the water ripple over stones. James and I used to picnic here when we first arrived. Jealousy, unexpected and sharp, twisted in Yates's chest. You miss him. Every day, she admitted. But differently now. The first year, grief was a constant companion. Now, she paused. Now there are days when I think of him with fondness rather than pain. Yates nodded, understanding. Time doesn't heal everything they say it does. No, she agreed. But it changes things. Changes us. After a moment, she added, Marshall Tate came by. Says the Broken Spur is still hiring. Asked if you'd be interested. The implication was clear. His reason for staying, Diablo's injury, was healed. It was time to move on. Been thinking on that, Yates admitted. And her voice was carefully neutral. He looked at her then, really looked. In the golden evening light, her chestnut hair gleamed, loose around her shoulders. Her wheat-colored eyes held questions she wouldn't voice. I should go, he said finally. Been imposing on your hospitality too long. Disappointment flickered across her face before she composed herself. You've more than earned your keep, helping with the repairs and the horses. She hesitated. But yes, I understand. The trail calls. The perfect opening to explain about his brother's widow, the undelivered letter, his years of running. To tell her why he couldn't stay, why attachment was dangerous, why he didn't deserve the peace he'd found in her presence. Instead, he said nothing, and the moment passed. They walked back to the house in silence, the weight of unspoken words between them. At the porch steps, Beth turned to him. Whatever you decide, Yates Flynn, know that you have a friend here. Always. Friend. The word was both gift and wound. That night, he lay awake in the barn loft, listening to the familiar sounds of the horses below. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a drifter with nothing but his horse and his gun. Now he found himself entangled in a life he hadn't sought. Welcome at the local saloon, greeted by name in town, awaited each evening by a woman whose smile made his chest ache. Dangerous, his mind warned. Remember what happens to those you care about. But for the first time in years, another voice whispered, what if you stayed? What if this time was different? Morning found him saddle-packed and ready, Diablo dancing impatiently. Beth stood on the porch, her face calm though her hands clutched her apron tightly. The foal's been named, she said, attempting lightness. Thought you might like to know. I'm calling him Tempest, after the storm that brought him. Yates nodded, his throat tight. Good name. When will you leave? Now, I reckon. He adjusted his hat, unable to meet her eyes. Wanted to thank you. For Diablo. For everything. Beth stepped closer, her composure slipping. You don't have to go, Yates. The ranch. I could use help with the horses. It would be a fair arrangement. Business. She was offering him business, not what his traitorous heart wanted. Best I move on, he said roughly. Never been one to settle. The hurt that flashed across her face made him hate himself. But it was better this way. Better to leave before he brought danger to her door, before she discovered the coward he really was. I understand. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. Safe travels, then. He mounted Diablo, tipped his hat, and rode away without looking back. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. 2 days later, Yates sat nursing a whiskey in the Broken Spur bunkhouse, surrounded by cowboys but utterly alone. He'd taken the job, throwing himself into the brutal work of spring roundup, hoping exhaustion would quiet his thoughts. It hadn't. Beth's face haunted him, her strength, her gentleness, the way she'd treated Diablo with such care, the way she'd looked at him like he mattered. Flynn, a voice interrupted his brooding. Marshall Tate stood in the doorway. Got a minute? Outside, the lawman lit a cigar, studying Yates through narrowed eyes. Heard you rode with Jake Flynn few years back. Yates stiffened. My brother. What of it? Just curious why you didn't mention it. Jake was well respected in these parts. Stopped a bank robbery in Whitetail before heading to Denver. Didn't know he'd been here, Yates said truthfully. We lost touch toward the end. Shame about what happened to him. Tate continued. Gunned down by that card-sharp, Blackwater or Blackstone, something like that. Blackwell, Yates corrected, the name still bitter on his tongue. Luther Blackwell. Tate's eyebrows rose. That's right. Nasty piece of work. He studied Yates. You've been looking for him. It wasn't a question. Yates knocked back his whiskey. 3 years, he admitted. Trail went cold after Cheyenne. The marshal nodded thoughtfully. Might interest you to know he was spotted in Silver Creek, 2 counties over. Last month. Yates's head snapped up. You certain? Certain enough to send a wire to the sheriff there. Tate blew a smoke ring. Thought you might want to know. Silver Creek. Less than 2 days' ride. After 3 years of searching, the man who murdered his brother might be within reach. Appreciate the information, Yates said, already calculating the journey. Tate caught his arm as he turned to go. Word of advice, Flynn. Vengeance has a way of hollowing a man out. Seen it before. His eyes were knowing. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. Yates pulled away. I made a promise. To kill him, or to take care of your brother's family. When Yates froze, Tate smiled grimly. Jake talked about his wife, his baby girl. Said his brother would make sure they were provided for if anything happened. Shame flooded Yates. I'm handling it. Are you? Tate challenged. Been 3 years. Unable to respond, Yates stalked back to the bunkhouse. That night, he packed his saddlebags, the letter burning against his chest. At dawn, he rode out, not toward Silver Creek, but back toward Whitetail. He needed to see Beth once more before he finished what he'd started. Needed to explain. Though what he could possibly say to make her understand his abrupt departure, he hadn't figured out. Approaching her ranch in the late afternoon, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The usual tranquility was disrupted by unfamiliar horses tethered outside. Drawing closer, he heard raised voices, a man's angry shout, Beth's defiant response. Sliding from Diablo's back, Yates approached cautiously, his hand on his pistol. Through the kitchen window, he saw Beth backed against the wall, facing 3 men. One he recognized as Harlan Wade, owner of the largest spread in the county, known for expanding his holdings by whatever means necessary. Be reasonable, Mrs. Summers, Wade was saying, his false cordiality failing to mask the threat in his stance. Your husband owed me money. Now that debt comes due, with interest. James owed you nothing, Beth retorted. We settled all accounts before his death. I have the papers to prove it. Wade's smile didn't reach his eyes. Papers can be lost. Or burned. He gestured to his companions. My men will start with the barn. By morning, there won't be much left of this place. Unless you sign the deed over now. Yates had heard enough. He stepped through the door, his gun drawn. Problem here, Beth? The room froze. Wade turned slowly, recognition and annoyance crossing his face. Flynn, this is private business. Doesn't look private to me, Yates countered, moving to Beth's side. Looks like 3 men threatening a woman alone. Beth's relief at seeing him was palpable, though confusion clouded her eyes. Yates, Mr. Wade claims James owed gambling debts. It's not true. Wade sneered. Your husband was a degenerate gambler who bet more than he could afford. He lost this property to me fair and square. Yet you waited until after his death to claim it, Yates observed coldly. Convenient. One of Wade's men reached for his gun. Yates was faster, his shot splintering the doorframe inches from the man's head. Next one won't miss. The standoff crackled with tension until Wade raised his hands in mock surrender. No need for bloodshed. We're leaving. At the door, he turned back. This isn't over, Mrs. Summers. Flynn won't always be around to play hero. After they'd gone, Beth sagged against the table, trembling. Thank you. If you hadn't come when you did. Yates holstered his gun, fighting the urge to take her in his arms. Has he threatened you before? She nodded. Started a month after James died. I never believed him. James wasn't a gambler, but Wade's persistent. He wants your land, Yates surmised. Water rights. The springs in the north pasture, Beth confirmed. They never run dry, even in drought years. Yates paced, his planned explanation forgotten. He'll be back. With more men. I know. Beth looked around the home she'd fought to keep. But I won't run. This is my land, my life. Her courage moved him. Here was a woman who faced threats alone rather than surrender what was rightfully hers. While he had spent years running from his responsibilities, his promises. I shouldn't have left, he said abruptly. Beth's eyes widened. What? I was a coward, Yates admitted. Running from everything. Why did you come back? She asked softly. The moment of truth. Yates reached into his shirt and withdrew the worn letter. My brother was murdered 3 years ago. This is his last letter to his wife and daughter in Denver. I promised I'd deliver it, take care of them. Instead, I've been hunting the man who killed him." Understanding dawned on Beth's face. "And now, Marshall Tate says he's been spotted nearby." Yates hesitated. "But when I heard, all I could think about was you. Coming back here, making sure you were safe." Beth stepped closer. "And now that you have?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent so long believing attachment was dangerous, that caring for someone meant watching them get hurt. But seeing you threatened just now made you want to protect me," she finished. "That's not weakness, Yates. That's strength." Her insight struck him like lightning. For years, he'd equated caring with vulnerability, love with loss. But watching Beth stand her ground against Wade had shown him true courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it for something that mattered. "I need to deliver this letter," he said finally. "Keep my promise to Jake. Then find Blackwell." Beth nodded, disappointment evident despite her understanding. "Of course. You should come with me," he blurted out. She stared at him, confusion written across her face. "What?" "To Denver," he clarified. "Wade won't stop. You're not safe here alone. And after—" he took a deep breath. "After I've kept my promise, maybe we could start fresh. Somewhere new. Or here, if that's what you want." "Start fresh," Beth repeated carefully. "As what exactly?" Yates took her hands, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. "As whatever you'll have me be. Partner. Friend." He swallowed hard. "Husband. Someday, if you could ever see your way to that." Beth's eyes filled with tears. "You're asking me to leave everything I've built. My home. The horses. I know it's too much," he backtracked. "Forget yes." Yates blinked. "Yes." Beth smiled through her tears. "Not forever. We'll come back once Wade is dealt with properly. The horses can be boarded with the Taylors until then." Her smile faded. "But I won't be a replacement for what you've lost, Yates. If we do this, it has to be for us. Not your guilt, not your past." He drew her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "It's for us," he promised. "For this second chance I never thought I'd find. Never thought I deserved." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, then deepening with the promise of all that could be. When they finally parted, Beth touched his face with wonder. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she admitted. "After James, I believed that part of my life was over." "And now?" Yates asked, his heart in his throat. Her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Now I believe in second chances." Denver, Colorado Territory, 1884. Snow dusted the streets as Yates guided the wagon through the bustling city, Beth beside him bundled against the December chill. After 9 months of traveling, building a life together, this final journey felt like coming full circle. Finding Emma Flynn and her daughter had been easier than expected. She had remarried, a kind shopkeeper who had adopted Jake's daughter as his own. The letter, when finally delivered, had brought closure rather than reopened wounds. And to Yates's surprise, the meeting had lifted a weight he'd carried for 3 years. Luther Blackwell had proven more elusive. The trail in Silver Creek had gone cold, and gradually, Yates had found his thirst for vengeance overshadowed by his growing future with Beth. They had married in a small ceremony in Wyoming, with Marshall Tate and his wife as witnesses. The news that reached them later, that Blackwell had been killed in a saloon brawl in Montana, had felt like divine justice. Now they were returning to Whitetail Creek. Wade's attempts to seize Beth's property had been thwarted when the marshal discovered forged documents in his possession. With Wade awaiting trial, the path was clear for them to reclaim their home. "Nervous?" Yates asked, noticing Beth's contemplative expression. "A little," she admitted. "It's been almost a year. The Taylors have kept everything in good order," he reminded her. "And Diablo's probably missing his stable." Beth smiled, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. "And this little one needs a proper home, not a wagon bed." Yates covered her hand with his, still amazed by the miracle growing beneath his palm. Their child, a new beginning neither had dared hope for. "I've been thinking," he said. "The ranch name, Summers Place, doesn't quite fit anymore." "What did you have in mind?" Beth asked. Yates grinned. "Second Chance Ranch. For all of us who found one there." Beth leaned against his shoulder, contentment radiating from her. "Perfect." As they crested the hill overlooking Whitetail Creek, The small ranch came into view, nestled between rolling hills now white with early snow. Smoke curled from the chimney. The Taylors had prepared for their arrival, and in the pasture, horses grazed peacefully, including a spirited yearling colt who could only be Tempest. "Home," Beth whispered. Yates drew the wagon to a halt, taking in the scene before them. His journey had begun with a wounded horse and a widow's kindness. It had led him through his darkest fears and into a light he'd never thought to find again. "Home," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "For as long as we both shall live." Beth reached up to touch his face, love shining in her eyes. "And beyond that, Yates Flynn." And beyond. As snow began to fall softly around them, Yates kissed his wife, the woman who had saved not just his prized horse, but his hardened heart. Together, they drove down toward their future, a second chance built on love strong enough to tame even the wildest frontier.